welcome to the UK Column Live. 13 minutes later than originally planned. Myself, Lou Collins and Brian are here down in Plymouth.
Good afternoon.
What's the weather doing, Brian?
The weather today is overcast. We've had some very heavy rain showers this morning, so our forecast for the rest of today is similar, and our forecast for tomorrow is also similar. Expect rain.
Thank you, Brian. I do believe you're going to lead the story for today.
Well, we're going to hand over to Mike, but if we just run
sorry.
through what we've got selected today, we're going to have a look at what's happening in Spain and talking about some of the big banks. This is a story which we think the mainstream media is just not covering the seriousness of the situation in Europe and Spain in particular. We're going to have a little look at UK politics and Labour conference. We're going to touch on the subject of Jimmy Saville. We think there's a lot more to this story than has come into the press so far. And then we've got some science issues to follow up.
Yeah, we've got about cows.
We've got about cows, we've got about energy storage and wind farms.
Yep.
So we're going to lead on what's happening in Spain and unemployment. And we should be able to call Mike in here.
Yes, good afternoon.
Afternoon, Mike.
Hello.
Right, so Spain's unemployment situation, they've now got 4.7 million people unemployed. The situation is not getting any better, but it's the cause, of course, is the banks. And you know, we've been covering the bankruptcy of the Spanish banks for quite a long time. The allegation has been that Spain needs 50 billion pounds or so, or 50 billion euros rather, to bail out their banks. Moody's is warning that it's 100 billion euros, but basically we have to keep in mind that the Spanish banks are bankrupt. They are the most bankrupt of the banks, Santander being the worst case, I believe, and so this is the core of Spain's problem: the fact that their banks are bankrupt. And they want to bail them out. So, as usual, Spanish government, just like the British government and most other European governments, are doing nothing to deal with the underlying economic problems, and they are just sticking with the austerity and bailout policy, protect the banks, and to hell with the people.
Yeah,
I think it's interesting that this has been going on for ages, and I know we've had Patrick Henningsen on for months now talking about Spain, and it's only now when it's all really collapsing that the mainstream are having to report on it, because there was nothing on it a few months ago, and it was the alternative media that were bringing it out.
well, I think this is where we've got to say that it's so important that people do start to tune into the alternative media, whether it's the UK Column or other reliable channels, because the picture that we're being given consistently by the mainstream media is not true.
No.
Certainly the Spanish situation is becoming more serious, because we've now got mention of the Spanish army taking sides in disputes within regions. So what we can see now is that the financial collapse orchestrated in Europe, massive pressure of unemployment beginning to impact people now getting to the stage they can't feed themselves or their families, and this is the breakdown of law and order, which we think is part of the key European project to create utter chaos, and that means that the authorities can then bring in the heavy-handedness to create this supranational dictatorship. So at the moment, a lot of people saying, well, the European Union is falling apart. That may be true, but to me it seems that what's actually going on is a deliberate breakdown in order to give the excuse for the police state. Mike, I think you had some mention of JP Morgan and UK Column reports on JP Morgan.
Right. So the next slide is JP Morgan sued for fraud over mortgage-backed securities. Now, Robert Peston was on the Today programme this morning, and he was making a big deal of yet more internal emails or secret emails that he had discovered. And basically, this is an issue with JP Morgan that they've kind of inherited the problem, because they helped to bail out Bear Stearns. If you remember back in 2007, 2008, over one weekend. It was decided that JP Morgan would take on all the liability of Bear Stearns, and this is the fallout from that. And the point that I wanted to highlight was that, in fact, Mr. Peston doesn't really have some unique access to these internal emails. They were known about a year ago. We published this story in September 2011. And it was exactly this story. So we were talking about the fact that internal emails at Bear Stearns were describing the products that they were selling to their investors as a sack of SH1T, as Peston put it this morning. But that's what the internal emails were describing, the products that that Bear Stearns was selling at that time, and JP Morgan was aware of it when they took this stuff on. So JP Morgan is being sued, but really what I wanted to highlight was that the BBC is only about a year behind on this particular issue.
Well, I wonder whether perhaps we could suggest that the BBC is only now choosing to use Robert Peston to bring this out, because of course as a common purpose future leader, Robert Peston is clearly doing the bidding of his masters. He is heavily involved with the Media Standards Trust. So we've got a supposedly independent BBC correspondent who's working with the Media Standards Trust, which is itself funded by mainstream banks and all their offshoot foundations. Media Standards Trust, of course, is working with Leveson via Sir David Bell. So really, can we trust anything that Peston says? We don't think so. The UK columns reported it, as you've kindly pointed out, well in advance. So what we think is happening here is more propaganda being put forward. So I think spotlight beginning to come on the BBC, bit of a pun there, I think. But I think the Jimmy Saville thing, which we're going to be moving on to in a minute, is beginning now to take the lid off what the BBC really is, which is a propaganda machine.
Somebody in the chat book said apparently last night there was a pro Karl Marx programme on BBC Two last night.
Well, whoever's produced that comment, I'm going to say thank you very much, because it's going to lead us in very nicely to the next topic, which is the Labour conference. I'll just bring this up on screen. It's a pretty unpleasant photograph. The Telegraph here showing the famous brothers cuddling. We were all led to believe, of course, they had a big bust up over the leadership, but in fact, what's been happening behind the scenes is these two have been working as dedicated socialists. And of course, the key to this is what these men really are. And a simple little bit of research into their father, Ralph Miliband, reveals that we've got a gentleman who was so enamoured with Karl Marx that he made a personal dedication to socialism by the grave of Karl Marx. I believe he's buried close to Karl Marx. And so to us in the UK column, it's no surprise that we've got two brothers now leading the Labour Party. They've stripped out all of old Labour, so what we've got left is actually an extreme left-wing front, as put forward by Tony Blair. And of course, these two have been brought up in the Marxist mould. So it's no wonder that at the moment we are seeing that the move towards this socialist supranational dictatorship is now picking up speed. So well done for those two individuals that pointed this out.
Yeah, and somebody said the brothers grim.
They are pretty grim. Whether we'd want either of these two men as our Prime Minister, I personally don't think so. It's an insult to anybody who's stood up against all that Karl Marx stands for. But something that the Telegraph was kind enough to point out here is that two of David Miliband's biggest backers are New Labour architects Lord Mandelson, of course an overwhelmingly honest and upstanding gentleman, and Alastair Campbell, probably the same, and they issued their own warning to the party not to retreat into its comfort zone. So of course, as is usual with the conference, it is not about what can be done to improve the lot of ordinary people in this country. It's to do with what the Labour Party or the Tory or the Lib Dem Party can do to improve its own power base.
Yeah.
So the key is that we have two gentlemen brought up in the socialist mould. Ed Miliband, if I just bring a piece of paper in here, this is a report from The Guardian, and it's saying that Ed Miliband is now talking about education, where he's vowing to end elitism. But of course it was Tony Blair that is on record with the IPPR as saying that he was going to deliberately create an elitist camp, and we've shown that on the UK column. So I think our message is don't believe a word these men say.
Yep.
That leads on quite nicely to Ed Balls. This man, of course, is not really trusted by anybody, but the key to what he does is the fact that he is a out-and-out Bilderberger. If you're watching live today and you've never heard that expression, please research for yourself, but this is the organisation of very wealthy globalists and people involved with global corporations who've consistently worked since the end of the Second World War to devise one world government. Ed Balls is a member of that club. He's spent public money on travelling to the Bilderberg organisation. So his policy is not Labour policy, it's Bilderberg. But what he's talking about in the Mail is that he wants to build £100,000 houses. Sorry, he wants to build £100,000. I'll start again, I'm not doing well there. He wants to build 100,000 houses, and he's going to use what he believes is 4 billion from a 4G network sale to pay for it. But of course the thing that is missed out is where are the jobs for these people and where are these individuals going to come from? Yeah. So it's a scam, and a few people have been pointing out to him, including Treasury experts who've said that whilst he's claiming that there's 4 billion at stake, in fact it's only worth 1.5 billion. So is this man an idiot? Does he know what he's doing, or is there something deeper going on here? Well, of course, more and more houses in the country is putting more pressure on the infrastructure. So presumably this is Bilderberg policy.
And there's no money to pay for these houses, people to buy these houses anyway.
Well, of course.
The only people who can buy them are the super rich.
Absolutely, because the rest are going into housing associations.
Absolutely, and the housing associations, and that's it.
Yeah. Mike, I can see you indicating you just want to comment in there.
Yeah, I mean, we mentioned this yesterday because Balls, the point I was making yesterday was that Balls is not doing anything to improve the economic lot of the real economy. But what I wanted to add to that today was that on last night's media coverage, they had a lot of comment from the unions on what Balls and Miliband were saying at the conference, and I have to say it concerns me a lot that the unions absolutely don't seem to have a different story. They're criticising what Balls and Miliband are saying, but they don't have. They're still in the same mindset, the same kind of rhetoric, and they're not. While they're offering criticism, they're not offering any real solutions. So I've got a bit of criticism for the unions as well in that sense.
Well, I think we can put some of it down to the fact that the same political agenda that's penetrated all three mainstream parties has also penetrated the top structure of the unions.
Yeah.
So we've now got the situation where the unions have been subverted, and we've got old-style unionists who are talking to us about this issue. I don't think it's any surprise that we've got a union called Unite, because, of course, by bringing the unions into a super body, they can be politically controlled in the same way that we're seeing politicians.
Yeah. That brings us nicely into this one, actually.
Sorry, I apologise for this. We'll just put up a picture of Ed Balls in case nobody's too sure of what he looks like. But please do research the Bilderbergers, because this is what this man is really about. I dropped in this one very quickly, coming on to your story, Louise. But we are seeing at the moment MPs exposed continually for wrongdoing with expenses. Anybody else, that would be criminal action, but MPs, as we regularly say, it's fiddling or wrongdoing. But this man, Keith Vaz, has now been the subject of an investigation over £500,000 in mysterious bank accounts, as you do, the odd £500,000. what the article, and it is a good article by the Mail, is pointing out is that he has been chairman of the Home Affairs Select Committee, and therefore he's been supposedly holding the police to account on operational matters, and he's been particularly scathing on in his criticism of Scotland Yard over phone hacking. But if we look into this man's history, which the Mail has done very nicely for us, his career is riddled with problems. He was suspended from the House of Commons after falsely claiming a former policewoman, a friend of Mrs. Vaz's former personal assistant, had made intimidating phone calls, so wasting police times. He's been involved with the Anglo-Iraqi billionaire trying to avoid extradition in France. And it goes on, but each time he's brought back into government. Who brings him back into government? Well, the same senior politicians that are fiddling their expenses in the first place. I think what's going on is that we're now starting to see the real cross-party political agenda, which is of reducing Britain to total chaos. And so, of course, discrediting and exposing politicians is part of that.
Absolutely.
So Mr. Vaz, watch closely, but I believe the police are also watching him closely, and maybe they've got a score to settle. We'll see.
Maybe.
Here you are.
Yeah, here they
you
are.
wanted the cartoon.
No,
You've
but I
got
wanted
it on
that
stream.
cartoon, definitely. Well, it's about, funny you mentioned the unions. This is from a study from the GMB, and it says 65% of public sector workers are women, but they're feeling the brunt of all these regional pay plans. There's going to be a postcode pay deal going on for all the public sector workers, and it's mainly going to hit women. If regional pay is implemented, this will cut pay and be a further devastating blow for local economies across the UK. For some reason, Tories have a problem with women workers in the public services. They just don't like them doing well. This was an article in today's Mirror. They list how many women are working there, and as we say, it's 65% of the public sector workers are women. Yeah. And if this pay plan goes through, it is going to hit them really, really hard.
Well, I think this is a deliberate plan to hit them hard.
Yeah.
I think what we've seen in the country is pressure for women to go out and work. We've now got families that can only function because both parents are absolutely working flat out.
Yeah, or the parents aren't together anymore. So if they're unemployed, it makes them harder for the parents to stay. If they're not employed, it makes the benefits get cut if they're a couple. So the husband moves out. But then now if the women go out to get work, they're going to feel the pinch as well. So what do women do?
Well, we're creating poverty. A lot of people say to us, it's madness, things don't make sense. But the UK Column View, UK Column Live, will put back to the audience today that if you simply start to think that what you are actually watching and experience is the deliberate undermining of this country, the deliberate breakdown of its economic capability. We are seeing politicians becoming wealthier and wealthier. They are millionaires. They take a little extra income by fiddling their expenses. Meanwhile, British politicians are attacking ordinary people by absolutely destroying their pensions, their savings, their work. Young people, they haven't even got a job, but they're now saddled in debt.
Even ex-politicians are getting wealthier and wealthier. Ex-politicians
Tony Blair,
possibly,
for example.
Yeah, well, basically.
We hope to be doing a little bit more for Tony Blair in the future, but we'll leave that for another time. So quite an important article, and I think as you say, for women who are working flat out to support families and households in this country, this is a direct attack on them by the present government.
Yep, agreed.
Well, this is the big story,
isn't it? Just,
but we think not quite in the way it's coming across in the mainstream press.
I don't think so. My question is the article that I'm quickly going to look at now is from the Mirror. I know Sir Jimmy Saville spent the night with a girl aged 12, says ex-BBC producer Wilfred de Ath, which apparently he told ITV Newsnight last night. My question is why didn't he do something about it? Why did he not get in touch with the authorities? We've had Paul Gambaccini. He knew about it. He knew what was going on. And apparently Jimmy Saville used to say that nothing could happen to him. He was basically untouchable, and if people wanted to run the story and he got approached by police, apparently his response would be, well, there goes the money for Stoke Mandeville Hospital, there goes your money, you know, almost using his charitable work, like, I'm going to take this away from the children if you come and mention it. And he was basically untouchable. But I would like to know what these people, with regards to BBC workers, if they knew this was going on, they're supporting child abuse, in other words, really, because if they're not doing anything about it.
Well, I think this is absolutely the case. We've seen in the Rochdale incident over the last week, 10 days, where we've got child abuse going on in South Yorkshire. It was covered up by the police, it was covered up by the local authorities, and the wall of silence ultimately meant that more children were abused. And here is the BBC, which should be investigating, which should be getting the truth out, and all of a sudden it's getting very murky. Very. So I think you're absolutely right on that. And the other thing that I think we should comment on, of course, in the background, the BBC has been doing some very strange little campaigns to do with supposedly finding adoptive parents for children. They ran a campaign called Families Wanted, in which the BBC was printing photographs of very young children, as the UK column described, like puppies, supposedly to find these children new parents. When the UK column questioned the BBC and their advisory consultants as to whether the parents had voluntarily given up these children for adoption or the children had been stolen from them, all of a sudden it went quiet and the BBC didn't want to talk to us anymore. So this isn't just a question about the BBC, this is now starting to raise questions about what is the relationship between the BBC and organisations supposedly handling or protecting the interests of young children. We can follow it up here that we've got people coming forward, haven't we, to actually give their stories, and it's quite significant now that this is not one or two. We've got a number of women now coming forward to saying that they were assaulted at the time, and the BBC is not very happy about this and doesn't seem to want to investigate. And I wonder whether this is because the actions of Jimmy Saville were not only known, but the activities were actually penetrating the higher echelons of the BBC.
Can I just make an observation? Bill Maloney, a good friend of ours here, he has been talking about this, in particular talking about a Louis Theroux documentary which went out a few years ago. And Bill Maloney obviously is a great campaigner for children and institutionalised child abuse. And Bill Maloney has been talking about this for a long time.
He has, and he has been warning about Jimmy Saville for a long time.
Absolutely.
If viewers would like to see some of his work, and I will say that his documentary films are outstanding.
Pretty hard-hitting.
Hard-hitting, disturbing, but this is a disturbing subject. Then have a look for Pie and Mash films.
Pie and Mash films.
Pie and
Mash films, yeah.
And you will see a number of films that he's produced.
We'll hopefully have him down here in the studio soon.
The subject also, well, I've just got this Mail story here which is saying that pressure is intensifying for a full inquiry at the BBC amid claims it was an open secret. Now, apparently the BBC is already saying we've done a comprehensive search of records and files, and we can find no records of anything to do with alleged abuses by Jimmy Saville. We find this particular statement by the BBC very interesting because we know that in Oxford at the moment, around Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, the police, that's Thames Valley Police, Oxfordshire County Council and Oxfordshire Child Safeguarding Board are using exactly the same tactic, which is, oh dear, we can't find any evidence. People have come forward, we haven't investigated, the evidence can't be found. So what is actually happening here? We don't know. Esther Rantzen, of course, has been speaking out sensationally, and she claims people in TV blocked our ears. Now that's a very interesting statement by the Mail. People in TV blocked our ears.
Sorry, that's a really interesting statement coming from her, who is the founder of Childline, though.
Well, this is true.
Okay.
I mean, it doesn't make sense. You can't have your ears blocked. Once you've actually heard the stories, then presumably we're now in the situation where Ms. Rantzen was aware. This is what the mainstream reports seem to be saying, that she was also aware of rumours, and we ask, what did Esther actually do herself to protect these youngsters? But it is extraordinary that she is, of course, the person who now stands forward. I've got a picture of her on screen if you've forgotten what the lady looks like. This is the lady running Childline, and we know in at least one case where a young girl was being abused and her mother was desperate to protect her, that Esther Rantzen suddenly cut off all contact with the mother and refused to help. So stories are emerging through the UK column. Whether they're true or not at the moment, we don't know, but the stories are definitely there, where people are saying they went to Miss Rantzen for help, and of course she's there as the promoter of Childline, and they didn't get help. It seems extraordinary now we've got this BBC thing here. And The Guardian here commenting on the fact that Newsnight staff were furious after an abuse report was dropped, and the story is that there was an attempt by the investigative team inside the BBC to do some sort of programme, but they were stopped or warned off. This is exactly the same response that was carried out in the BBC when BBC teams attempted to report the scandalous abuse of the Down syndrome girl Holly Gregg. So BBC teams were set up. They'd been working with the mother, Anne Gregg, and with Robert Green, the campaigner, and then at the last moment senior BBC managers suddenly pulled the programme. So the picture is not, the issue we do not think is just about Jimmy Saville. We think the issue is also about to what extent the BBC have been aware of this abuse, and to what extent the BBC is aware of other abuses of children which they are simply not reporting.
No.
Serious stuff.
Very.
Just moving at the end of the programme into a little bit of military and also science and technology. We've got some comment on wind farm and energy storage, but in the background has been the issue of a takeover by of BAE Systems by French and German EADS. Now, at the moment, this story is slipped into the background, but of course, what is really at stake here is that if BAE is taken over by the German and French interests, then Britain is left with absolutely no independent national defence capability. We are simply dependent on the controlling interests of the Germans and the French. This plan, of course, fits in totally with the devious manipulation of Britain's defence policy, which David Cameron has carried out since he's come into power. So he is elected, and out of nowhere is a 50-year partnership with the French. We're no longer capable of defending ourselves. We've got to rely on the French. This is incredible. But of course, the Americans are now getting very suspicious of this deal because, of course, if the Germans and French are to take over BAE Systems, then the Americans cannot be sure that their military secrets, in particular relating to aircraft carrier technology, submarines and missile defence systems, is not going to be passed straight into the hands of the Germans and French. And what viewers and listeners should be aware of is that consistently through the Cold War and the NATO era, the special relationship between Britain and America meant that there was a very high level of protection over US and UK eyes-only material, whereas material shared with the Germans, Dutch and other NATO countries was of a lower classification, and the French were really marginalised as being a semi-unreliable NATO partner. So it's quite extraordinary that we've now got this very devious plan by Cameron to bring them into a a straitjacket with the Germans and French. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, I know we've slightly overrun for time here, but we'll keep going just to finish these articles. We're talking about a withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the NATO General Secretary Rasmussen is saying that this could be speeded up. Yeah. Simple comment on this is we wonder what experience the NATO General Secretary has to comment on these matters. His qualification is ex-Prime Minister from Denmark, but do watch the plot for this one. Natural news and cows. Me and
natural news, and this is also, I wanted to give natural news the focus on this, but it has been reported in the BBC. New Zealand scientists have unveiled a genetically modified mutant cloned cow, which they say produces reduced allergen milk for consumption by human babies. It's also being reported not only on natural news but on the BBC. Scientists cloned a cow and then altered the embryo using RNA interference. After gestation, the mutant GMO cow was born without a tail, but these scientists say that there's no problem and that the mutation of having no tail couldn't possibly be related to anything they did with the cow's DNA. The milk being produced by this mutant cow, mutant cloned tailless GMO cow actually, is of course 100% driven by artificial hormones. It has not yet become pregnant and produced milk normally, so the scientists used hormones to jumpstart milk production. And I just would like to quickly run through how they made this Daisy the cow. Scientists took a cow's skin cell and genetically modified it to produce molecules that blocked the manufacture of BLG protein. The nucleus of this cell was then transferred into a cow egg that had its own nucleus removed. You still with me?
Yes.
The reconstituted egg was grown in the lab until it formed what is called a blastocyst, a ball around... basically it was then transported into the womb of a foster cow. The cloning technique is not efficient. Of around 100 blastocysts the scientists implanted into cows. So it's just all been made and it's being done to give to our children.
Yeah, and we're simply saying we're flagging this up with viewers and listeners today because we need to know about this sort of stuff.
We do.
If we don't know about it, we can't start to stop it by saying we simply don't condone it, won't accept it.
It is hidden amongst the BBC pages, but you really have to go looking for it. You're certainly not going to hear about it on the news. On the
well, you have on UK Column Live. Mike, you've got a couple of tail-end articles here on wind farm and energy storage.
Well, this was just an update to yesterday's story about wind farms being given cash for switching their turbines off. Basically because, well, for two reasons. First of all, when the wind starts to blow a bit more, the national grid can't take the surplus energy, and certainly can't store the surplus energy. And of course, once the wind reaches a certain stage, then the turbines have to be switched off because they can't cope with the stress of extremely high winds. So the national grid is paying wind farm owners huge amounts of money in order to switch their machines off at certain times. And then today we had an article in the BBC, on the BBC website, which was suggesting that some scientists are spending a lot of time and effort inventing ways to capture storage from renewable energy. And I just question that money is being spent in these areas. These people could be deployed researching much more useful or inventing much more useful energy solutions for us, rather than trying to get. It seems like they're trying to solve a problem that doesn't really exist. We shouldn't be basing our energy strategy on wind turbines in the first place, and so this seems like a complete waste of time and effort to me. That's really all.
But of course, at the moment, we're not getting any comprehensive analysis of what the whole wind farm programme has done for the country. but we are now starting to pick up this business of the turbines switched off, or they're not generating electricity anymore.
Well, in my view, on the long term, if we base our energy strategy on wind turbines, we are going to end up with a very serious economic situation in the not too distant future, where actually we're shutting down reliable forms of electricity generation, and we will not be able to produce electricity reliably. We're looking at regular blackouts and whatnot because of weather, and this was part of the point I was making yesterday. We can't predict. The Met Office is incapable of properly predicting the weather, and so in those circumstances, how can we plan for what energy is needed if we have no sort of predictable power generation capability when we're relying on the weather to produce our energy?
Absolutely. And I'll just add in there that I hesitate to mention the date, but roughly 1973-74, when I was at university, the City University in London. Looking back, I find it very interesting that one of the tutors set us a task at that time to look at whether it was possible to generate the whole of UK's energy supplied by windmills. So I wonder what those tutors at City University knew about the forthcoming energy agenda. We've got one last article and then a couple of comments to make on the paper. Drones.
Drones, yes.
Did that come from you?
That did come from me. I forgot we were doing this one. I thought we were
well,
cutting off
just
quickly.
Keep you on your toes.
Found it in the Huffington Post. Police Minister Damien Green backs police use of drones. The Home Office Minister said that remotely controlled drones in the UK skies should be treated like any other piece of police kit. What interests me is what civil liberty campaigners are saying, that it could also be used by private companies, and the first company that springs to mind is G4S
or Serco.
Or Serco, yeah. So this is what this Damien Green wants to happen in our skies, for unmanned drones to be flying over, surveilling us all, and some police are backing it as well.
Well, of course, and policy of being set by ACPO, Association of Chief Police Officers, as a private company anyway, so it does fit.
But in Merseyside, police drones crashed into the River Mersey, and they said they would never replace it. And the Civil Aviation Authority says that they're not going to allow the drones at the moment. But some
but that's drones to watch us.
Drones to watch us,
Mike, final comment.
We've been warning about this use of drones for civilian purposes for quite some time. This is a serious civil liberties issue, in my opinion, and we need to be shouting about it from the rooftops.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
The papers, last week we had no broadcast because Mike and Brian were concentrating with the paper. It's been done, it's been finished, and it will be dispatched tomorrow. If people are liking what we're doing, please subscribe so we can keep making movies, we can keep going on with the paper, and ukcolumn.org.
Absolutely. And we just say that we often get reports in from people that what we're reporting people are finding disturbing. We are not making up the information we're pushing out, we're simply trying to put it in a context. What do we feel is going on in the country? Britain is being deliberately undermined and collapsed. That's the economy, that's the social structure. Who are the people doing this? Our own MPs. You can describe them as anti-British. Some people believe that the domestic terrorists are in Westminster, and I would actually agree with that as a statement. If we want to stop what's happening, we've got to understand how it's being done. It's subversive. It's a cross-party agenda.
It's chaos.
Well, we've got to warn people about the chaos and what's creating, and we've got to make sure that people stay calm and work together. If you want to stop it, stick together. Otherwise, the divide and rule policy comes into play. We've just got one comment here, which I thought. There we are. Gentleman's come into Shoutbox and said, Brian, yesterday at midday, I posted a comment on the Daily Mail article about Jimmy Saville. Surprised, the comment got moderated out. All I wrote was, shame that Esther doesn't unblock her ears to the Holly Gregg scandal. So that's a very interesting comment from one of our viewers. Thank you very much for sending that in. And yes, we will watch Esther Rantzen with great interest over the coming weeks. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
Goodbye.